I wore cheap clothes and ate instant noodles for years to keep my husband's tech startup alive while he cried bankruptcy. But what happens when you discover the man playing poor at the dinner table is hiding millions of dollars in a secret wall safe? If you have ever been the financial backbone for a liar, listen closely. The way I dismantled his fake empire will make you rethink every secret in your own home. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Chloe Robinson. I am 34 years old, and I work as a software testing specialist living under the constant gray drizzle of Seattle, Washington. My days were a monotonous blur of staring at glaring monitors, hunting down glitches, and typing up endless bug reports for a massive technology firm called Ethernet Systems. But my job was not just a career, it was the only lifeline keeping my household from completely drowning in debt. I worked relentless overtime, clocking in 60 to 70 hours every single week, sacrificing my weekends and my holidays just to keep us afloat. Every single dollar I earned was immediately swallowed by our skyrocketing living expenses. I paid the mortgage, the electricity, the water, the internet, and every grocery bill that crossed our kitchen counter. I carried this crushing financial burden willingly because of my husband, Liam. Liam was the founder and chief executive officer of a startup tech company named Nexus Nova Solutions. To hear him tell it, Nexus Nova was a revolutionary venture that was tragically and perpetually stranded on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. Our evenings followed a miserable, predictable routine. I would come home utterly exhausted from the tech firm, boil a pot of cheap instant noodles, and sit across from him at the small dining table. Liam would rub his temples, sigh heavily, and deliver dramatic, heart-wrenching speeches about how the business was bleeding cash. He constantly reminded me that if we did not tighten our belts even further, his entire life's work would collapse before the end of the month. His manipulation was a masterclass in psychological control. He conditioned me to view every single penny spent on myself as an act of profound selfishness and a direct betrayal against his dream. I lived in a state of constant deprivation and suffocating guilt. The winter in Seattle was bitterly cold one year, and my old jacket was literally falling apart at the seams. The wind cut right through the thin fabric. I finally gathered the courage to visit a local thrift shop and purchased a heavily discounted, second-hand winter coat for $35. I felt so proud of finding such a bargain, but when I walked through the front door, Liam looked at the shopping bag, and his expression hardened into pure, devastating disappointment. He did not shout or throw things. He simply lowered his voice and said, "Chloe, I am glad you are keeping warm. I just had to tell 2 of my lead developers that I cannot make payroll this Friday, but your new coat is certainly a priority." The shame hit me so hard, I felt sick to my stomach. I returned the coat the very next morning and patched up the holes in my old jacket with thick black thread. I believed I was the ultimate supportive wife, sacrificing my own comfort for our shared future. That illusion shattered during a rainy Tuesday evening in early April. I was sitting at the dining table, sifting through a massive pile of digital receipts and bank statements to prepare our annual joint tax return, buried deep within a folder of deductible expenses. I spotted a glaring anomaly. It was a formal contract for a high-end luxury vehicle lease, officially registered under Liam's name, demanding payments of over $2,000 every single month. The numbers blurred in front of my eyes. I was eating sodium-packed noodles and wearing threaded rags, while my supposedly destitute husband was legally bound to a luxury sports sedan. I confronted him the moment he stepped out of the shower. I held the printed document in my shaking hands, demanding an explanation. I expected him to panic, to apologize, or to at least show a flicker of guilt for hiding such a massive expense. Instead, Liam remained perfectly composed. He calmly dried his hair with a towel, glanced at the paper, and offered a smooth, highly practiced response. "Chloe, please try to understand the realities of corporate fundraising," he said, looking at me as if I were a naive child. That lease is a temporary corporate requirement mandated by our lead angel investor. When I am pitching to venture capitalists for millions of dollars in funding, I cannot arrive at the meeting in a 10-year-old rusted sedan. It signals failure and incompetence. The vehicle is purely an operational expense to maintain appearances and secure capital. The company covers the cost, not us. His tone was so authoritative and condescending that I almost apologized for doubting him. I desperately wanted to believe his logical explanation. I wanted to trust that my years of suffering and starvation had not been in vain. I forced myself to swallow the rising panic, neatly filed the tax documents away, and returned to my grueling shifts at Ethernet Systems. But my intuition refused to stay quiet. The dark seed of suspicion had taken root in my mind, making me hyper-aware of his every move. I began to notice a chilling pattern. Deep in the middle of the night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, I would reach out and find his side of the bed completely empty. I would creep silently down the dark hallway and see a thin sliver of light escaping from the bottom of his home office door. The doorknob was always firmly locked from the inside. When I pressed my ear against the cold wood, I could hear him pacing the floor, engaging in intense, whispered phone conversations. The voice I heard through the door was not the voice of a broken man facing financial ruin. It was the sharp, commanding, and deeply secretive tone of someone playing a very high-stakes game in the shadows. The atmosphere in our house broke on a violently stormy Thursday night. Liam was out of town, having flown out early that morning on a grueling cross-country trip. True to his starving entrepreneur persona, he had loudly complained about booking the absolute cheapest red-eye ticket available, claiming he had to sit in the cramped back row near the restrooms just to save the company $150. I was left alone as a massive Pacific storm battered the coast. The wind howled against the siding, and the rain pounded the roof with terrifying force. Sometime past midnight, I heard a rhythmic, wet slapping sound echoing down the hallway. I followed the noise to the one room I usually avoided. Water was steadily dripping from a spreading brown stain on the ceiling, splashing directly onto the hardwood floor inside his home office. Panic set in immediately. I knew his office contained vital servers, external hard drives, and crucial company documents. I grabbed a stack of heavy towels and a plastic bucket from the kitchen, rushing in to contain the damage. The water was pooling dangerously close to a massive, floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelf that covered the entire back wall, fearing the wood would warp and ruin the electronics stored on the bottom shelves. I put my shoulder against the heavy furniture and pushed with all my remaining strength. The bookshelf groaned in protest, its heavy base scraping against the wet floorboards, until I finally managed to slide it 2 feet to the left, away from the expanding puddle. I dropped to my knees to dry the baseboards with a towel. As I wiped the wall, my hand brushed against a metal ventilation grill set low near the floor. Something felt deeply wrong. The metal was freezing cold, but there was absolutely no air blowing through the slats. I leaned in closer, squinting in the dim light. The screws holding the grill in place were completely fake, merely decorative caps glued onto the surface. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I dug my fingernails under the edge of the metal plate and pulled. It popped off with a quiet snap, completely detaching from the wall. Behind the fake vent was a cavity cut directly into the drywall and the wooden studs. Nestled perfectly inside that dark space was a sleek, matte black, high-tech steel safe. There was no keyhole, no traditional combination dial, only a glowing digital touch panel and a small, square glass window designed for a biometric thumbprint scan. The heavy steel door was flush with the frame, completely impregnable. The sheer expense of such a security device was staggering. You do not install military-grade wall safes when you are struggling to buy groceries. Early the next morning, I called a specialized emergency locksmith, claiming I had locked myself out of my own security box and lost the backup key. A burly man with a massive tool bag arrived an hour later. He knelt down, shining a bright flashlight over the matte black surface. He shook his head almost immediately and stood back up. "Ma'am, there is no physical keyway to pick on this specific model," he explained. packing his tools away. This is a custom-installed, commercial-grade vault, without the registered biometric fingerprint or the 8-digit master override code. You are not getting in there unless we bring in an industrial plasma cutter and completely destroy the wall. Even then, the internal thermal sensors might deploy an incendiary mechanism to destroy the contents. Whoever bought this spent at least $4,000 or $5,000 just for the unit. I thanked him, paid his hefty call-out fee in cash, and locked the front door for the next 72 hours. While Liam was supposedly pitching to investors in cheap hotel lobbies, I barely slept. I sat cross-legged on the damp floor of his office, surrounded by legal pads filled with numbers. I tried everything. I typed in my birthday, his birthday, our wedding anniversary, his parents' birth years, the date he founded his company, his social security number, and even his old college identification digits. Every single attempt was met with a harsh, glaring red light and a sharp electronic beep. The safe had a security protocol that locked the keypad for 60 minutes after 5 incorrect guesses. I spent 3 agonizing, sleepless nights staring at that black steel box, setting alarms on my phone to wake me up every hour just so I could try 5 more combinations. My eyes were bloodshot, my hands shook constantly, and the caffeine made my chest ache. By the early hours of Sunday morning, I was completely defeated. I rested my forehead against the cold steel, tears of frustration hot on my face. Then, a strange, seemingly irrelevant memory pierced through my exhaustion. 2 years ago, Liam had posted a gushing, romantic anniversary tribute to me on his public social media page. The post was full of grand declarations of love, but the date he attached to it was completely wrong. It was not our wedding day. It was not the day we met. It was November 8th. When I had pointed out the error at the dinner table. He had laughed nervously, waving his hand and blaming it on a clumsy typographical error made in a rush. I sat up straight. My fingers hovered over the glowing blue keypad. I slowly typed out the numbers for November 8th of that specific year. 110820222. The keypad flashed green. A heavy mechanical click echoed loudly in the silent room, followed by the soft whir of the internal locking bolts retracting. The thick steel door suddenly felt weightless as it swung open, pulling away the final layer of his deception and exposing a reality so cruel it would destroy my entire world. The heavy steel door swung open, and an unmistakable smell wafted out from the dark interior. It was the crisp, dry scent of freshly minted paper and cold metal. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat, and stared into a meticulously organized abyss. There, illuminated by the faint glow of the keypad, were stacks upon stacks of currency. They were bundled tightly in thick paper bands, arranged in perfect symmetrical rows. Every single bill was a $100 note. My eyes darted across the rows, doing a frantic, desperate calculation. $10,000 per bundle. There had to be at least $400,000 or $500,000 in raw, untraceable physical cash sitting right in front of me. I reached out with a trembling hand and brushed my fingertips against the top bundle. The rough texture of the paper felt like a physical strike to my chest. I remembered eating 50-cent noodles for 3 years. I remembered the heavy black thread I used to sew up my winter coat, all while my husband slept just feet away from a fortune. But the cash was merely the surface of the betrayal. Beside the neat walls of money sat a thick, black leather binder. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so violently I could barely open the heavy brass clasp. Inside, neatly filed into plastic sleeves, were dozens of monthly bank statements. They were not from our local community bank. These were elite corporate accounts based in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. I scanned the transaction histories, my vision blurring. The documents proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Nexus Nova Solutions was not failing. In fact, exactly 2 years ago, right around the mysterious date of November 8th, the startup had secured a massive influx of venture capital. The initial deposit was for over $8 million. Subsequent transfers showed millions more flowing into the offshore accounts. While Liam was sitting at our cheap dining table, holding his head in his hands and crying about bankruptcy. He was secretly directing a massive international financial empire. I flipped the heavy pages, my heart turning to solid ice in my chest. Tucked behind the banking records were thick manila envelopes containing certified property deeds. I pulled out the first document. It was the title for a luxury penthouse apartment located in downtown Miami, Florida, purchased entirely in cash for over $3 million. The second envelope held the deed to a sprawling, multi-story ski villa in Aspen, Colorado, featuring heated driveways and private mountain access. Both properties were registered under an obscure holding company, but the sole managing director listed on every single page was Liam. There was no mention of my name. There was no mention of our marriage. He had built an entire parallel universe of luxury and wealth, completely walled off from the miserable, impoverished reality he forced me to live in. Yet, the most devastating discovery was buried at the very bottom of the safe. It was a slim, unassuming gray folder marked only with the word transition in Liam's precise handwriting. I opened it and found a comprehensive, step-by-step legal strategy drafted by a high-end corporate law firm. It was a blueprint for my total financial destruction. The documents detailed exactly how Liam planned to systematically drain my personal savings, maximize the debt loaded onto our joint credit cards, and tie up my future wages before filing for a sudden, aggressive divorce. The strategy included instructions on how to gaslight me into signing away my rights to his company through disguised liability waivers. He had calculated exactly how much he could squeeze out of my grueling 60-hour work weeks before discarding me completely. I was not a partner. I was not a wife. I was merely a temporary, unwitting financier for a man who viewed me with absolute contempt. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train, but strangely, the tears did not come. The overwhelming agony I expected was instantly vaporized by a blinding, absolute rage. Every single sacrifice, every skipped meal, every humiliating moment of counting pennies at the grocery store checkout line, it had all been a meticulously directed stage play. He had cast me in the role of the loyal, suffering beast of burden so he could fatten his secret millionaire lifestyle. A lesser woman might have screamed. A weaker person might have grabbed her phone, called him in his cheap hotel room, and demanded an explanation through hysterical sobs. I did none of those things. The woman who had cried over a $35 thrift store coat died right there on the damp floor of his office. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and opened the camera application, moving with cold, surgical precision. I photographed every single page of the bank statements, every property deed, every offshore routing number, and every damning line of his divorce strategy. I took wide shots of the stacks of cash and extreme close-ups of the serial numbers on the bills. When I had captured hundreds of high-resolution images, I meticulously placed every folder, every envelope, and every bundle of money back exactly where I had found it. I made sure the leather binder was aligned perfectly with the cash. I closed the heavy steel door, listening to the solid mechanical lock engage. I carefully pressed the fake ventilation grill back into the wall, ensuring the decorative screws looked completely undisturbed. I stood up in the dark, silent room. Liam thought he had engineered the perfect crime. He thought I was nothing more than a blind, obedient fool. He was about to learn just how dangerous a woman can become when she has nothing left to lose. For the next 4 weeks, my life became an agonizing masterclass in psychological endurance. When Liam returned from his business trip, I greeted him at the front door with a tired smile and a plate of reheated leftovers. He immediately launched into his usual theatrical performance, rubbing his eyes and complaining about how the venture capitalists had practically laughed him out of the room. He claimed we needed to cut our grocery budget by another 20%, just to make sure he could pay his server hosting fees next month. I nodded sympathetically, stroked his shoulder, and told him I believed in his vision. I watched him eat, marveling at the sheer sociopathic ease with which he lied to my face. The man who owned a sprawling mountain estate in Colorado was sitting in my kitchen, pretending to stress over the cost of a carton of milk. My performance was flawless. I was the perfect, exhausted, deeply supportive wife. But underneath that carefully constructed facade, I was meticulously assembling the weapons for his absolute destruction. On a Tuesday morning, I used all my accumulated sick leave from the tech firm and took a taxi to the financial district in downtown Seattle. I walked into the sleek, glass-paneled offices of the most ruthless and feared corporate divorce attorney in the Pacific Northwest. Her hourly rate was staggering, equivalent to my entire monthly salary. But I did not care. I walked into her corner office, sat down in a plush leather chair, and placed a highly encrypted flash drive on her massive oak desk. I had spent days organizing the hundreds of photographs I took inside the wall vault into categorized, chronological folders. The attorney plugged the drive into her computer. For 45 minutes, the room was completely silent except for the clicking of her mouse. I watched her expression shift from professional detachment to genuine, predatory intrigue. When she finally looked up, she steepled her fingers and delivered a chilling analysis. "Chloe, your husband is not just hiding assets," she said, her voice sharp and precise. "He is currently finalizing a massive corporate acquisition. Based on these internal communications and offshore deposit structures, a major Silicon Valley conglomerate is preparing to buy Nexus Nova Solutions for upwards of $40 million. The deal is slated to close within the next 30 days. She turned the monitor toward me, pointing at the legal strategy document I had photographed. "Liam has structured this buyout so that the parent company absorbs all the valuable intellectual property, while the original corporate entity, the one tied to your shared marital assets, is loaded with toxic debt and manufactured liabilities. The moment the $40 million clears into his Cayman Islands accounts, he plans to file for divorce, declare the domestic company bankrupt, and leave you legally responsible for over $500,000 in joint business loans he secretly took out against your home." A cold shiver ran down my spine, but the attorney was already formulating our counteroffensive. When I signed the massive retainer agreement for the legal team, agreeing to pay them a percentage of the recovered assets, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. The attorney brought in a team of elite forensic accountants who transformed her conference room into a war room. They spent days dissecting the complex web of shell companies, phantom vendors, and international wire transfers Liam had constructed. They discovered a crucial, fatal flaw in his seemingly perfect plan. During the very first year of his startup, before he secured any outside funding or venture capital, I had used my own personal checking account to pay the state and corporation filing fees, the initial software patent applications, and the first 12 months of primary server hosting costs. Because we lived in a community property state, and my direct financial contributions were heavily documented, I was not merely a betrayed spouse entitled to half the marital assets. Under the strict interpretations of corporate law, I was the undisputed first angel investor of Nexus Nova Solutions. I held a legitimate, foundational, and controlling claim to the company's entire intellectual property portfolio. Working in tandem with international banking authorities, my legal team drafted highly aggressive ex parte emergency injunctions, armed with the irrefutable photographic proof of his ongoing financial fraud, his intent to flee, and the deliberate marital asset dissipation. We quietly approached a federal judge in a closed session. The evidence was so overwhelming and the malicious intent so clear that within 72 hours, the judge signed the secret freezing orders. The federal authorities immediately reached out to the international banking regulators. In complete, devastating silence, every single one of his offshore accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands was permanently frozen by government mandate. The millions of dollars he had painstakingly hoarded and hidden were suddenly locked away behind an impenetrable wall of federal red tape, entirely inaccessible to him without a court order. With the financial trap perfectly set, I sat down with my attorney to finalize the paperwork. I instructed her to draft the most merciless, uncompromising divorce petition legally possible. It was a brutal, ironclad document demanding 100% ownership of the company's intellectual property, full immediate title to the luxury properties in Florida and Colorado, an absolute forfeiture of all hidden cash assets inside the wall safe as punitive damages for his extreme financial fraud. It also mandated that he assume full personal responsibility for the toxic corporate debt he had planned to dump on me. The document was thick, heavy, and legally lethal. I took the final printed copy, slipped it into a plain manila envelope, and hid it beneath the spare tire in the trunk of my car. All that remained was choosing the perfect stage for his execution. The opportunity arrived 2 weeks later when Liam casually mentioned he wanted to host a small, modest gathering at our house. He claimed it was just a casual dinner to thank his core development team for surviving another tough quarter, but I knew the truth. I had seen the secret emails on the flash drive. This was not a casual dinner. It was a covert celebration for the final signing of his massive corporate buyout. The lead investors and the acquiring executives were flying into Seattle to finalize the paperwork right in our living room. Liam thought he was throwing a victory party for his genius escape plan. He had absolutely no idea that I held the detonator, and I was patiently waiting for the room to fill with people before I pressed the button. The evening of the gathering arrived with a suffocating air of pretension. Our modest living room was suddenly crammed with men in bespoke Italian suits and women wearing subtle but exorbitant jewelry. They were the acquiring executives and the lead venture capitalists, the architects of Liam's secret $40 million buyout, to maintain the illusion of a scrappy, starving founder. Liam had hired a suspiciously cheap catering service, serving lukewarm appetizers on flimsy paper plates. He stood in the center of the room, holding a glass of cheap, sparkling wine, playing the role of the humble, exhausted genius to absolute perfection. He regaled them with fabricated tales of late-night coding sessions and near bankruptcies, soaking up their admiring nods. I stood silently in the far corner of the room, blending into the shadows. I was wearing a deeply unflattering, scratchy polyester dress that I had purchased from a discount clearance rack for $19. Just hours before the guests arrived, Liam had inspected my wardrobe and explicitly forbidden me from wearing anything that looked remotely elegant. He insisted that my appearance needed to reflect the harsh financial sacrifices of a dedicated startup family. He wanted me to look worn out, ordinary, and pathetic, so his investors would feel a surge of paternal sympathy for his manufactured struggle. I smiled politely, sipping tap water from a plastic cup, feeling the rough fabric of the dress chafe against my skin. It was taking every ounce of my willpower not to burst into hysterical laughter at the sheer absurdity of his performance. About an hour into the event, Liam tapped his plastic cup with a silver spoon, demanding the attention of the room. The murmurs died down as he raised his glass. He delivered a sickeningly sweet speech, praising the vision of his lead investors and thanking his executives for believing in him when no one else did. He spoke for a solid 10 minutes about loyalty, sacrifice, and the grueling journey to success. Throughout the entire monologue, he did not look in my direction even once. It was as if I did not exist. Then, as he prepared to conclude his toast, his eyes finally met mine across the crowded room. A cruel, arrogant smirk spread across his face. "And of course," Liam announced, his voice dripping with condescending amusement, "I must acknowledge my lovely wife, Chloe. She's been here to keep the lights on and the instant noodles boiling." He paused, letting a few polite chuckles ripple through the audience. "Bless her heart, she does not have the slightest head for business. If I tried to explain a corporate merger to her, she would probably ask if it came with a discount coupon. But she sure knows how to stretch a dollar at the grocery store, and for that simple, domestic dedication, we are all very grateful." The laughter that followed was stiff and deeply uncomfortable. A few of the executives shifted awkwardly, casting pitying glances in my direction. They saw a financially illiterate, simple-minded woman being publicly humiliated by her brilliant, soon-to-be wealthy husband. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not lower my eyes. I simply offered him a bright, vacant smile, raised my plastic cup in silent agreement, and gently set it down on a nearby side table, while Liam was instantly swarmed by congratulatory handshakes and backslaps. I turned around and walked out of the living room. The raucous noise of his premature victory faded as I moved down the dimly lit hallway. I stepped into his home office, pushed the heavy oak door shut, and firmly engaged the deadbolt lock. The sudden silence was intoxicating. I moved directly to the bookshelf, gripping the edge and sliding it smoothly to the left. I pulled off the fake ventilation grill, exposing the high-tech wall vault. My fingers did not tremble as I typed out November 8th, 2022. The keypad flashed its familiar green light, and the heavy steel door swung wide open. I reached inside and began pulling out the bundles of cash, one by one. I tossed the thick stacks of $100 bills into a large canvas duffel bag I had hidden under the desk earlier that afternoon, when the safe was completely hollowed out, stripped of every single physical dollar. I reached into the oversized pocket of my cheap polyester dress. I pulled out the massive, legally binding divorce petition that demanded absolute control over his entire life's work. I placed the thick stack of papers right in the center of the empty metal shelf. From my other pocket, I produced a folded piece of heavy cardstock and a black pen. I uncapped the pen and wrote a brief, meticulously clear handwritten note. It read, "I know about the corporate acquisition. I own the foundational intellectual property as of yesterday morning. Your Cayman Islands account holding $8,400,000 and your Swiss account holding $12 million have been permanently frozen by federal mandate. Enjoy your party." I placed the note squarely on top of the divorce papers, ensuring it would be the very first thing he saw. I closed the vault, hearing the satisfying clack of the locking bolts, and reattached the fake grill. I pushed the heavy bookshelf back into its exact original position. I picked up the heavy duffel bag of cash and slung it over my shoulder. Walking to the utility closet near the kitchen, I grabbed the single rolling suitcase I had packed days ago. I did not look back toward the living room. I did not care to hear the clinking glasses or the sycophantic laughter anymore. I opened the back door, stepped out into the cool, damp Seattle night, and walked down the driveway toward my waiting taxi, leaving him to celebrate a kingdom that I had already burned to the ground. Exactly 1 hour after my taxi pulled away from the curb, the suffocating facade of Liam's victory party began to crumble. According to the sworn depositions filed later during the criminal investigation, the living room had started to empty out. Liam, riding the high of his perceived triumph, gestured for the lead venture capitalist to follow him down the hallway. He wanted to celebrate the imminent signing of their massive acquisition with a private toast. He had bragged about a rare vintage bottle of champagne he claimed he had been saving for years, locked away in his private study. Liam led the impeccably dressed investor into the dimly lit home office, shutting the door behind them to muffle the remaining party noise. With an arrogant flourish, he marched over to the heavy oak bookshelf. He pushed it aside with practiced ease, revealing the hidden wall vault to the bewildered investor. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner, eager to show off his secret stash of wealth and the expensive bottle of wine hidden behind the stacks of currency. The keypad flashed green, and the heavy steel door swung open. But there was no champagne. There was no fortune in $100 bills. There was only a gaping dark void, a starkly illuminated empty metal shelf, and a massive stack of legal documents staring right back at him. The color drained from Liam's face instantly. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as he reached in and grabbed the thick divorce petition. The handwritten note I had left squarely on top fluttered to the floor. The lead investor, sensing that something was catastrophically wrong, bent down and picked up the piece of heavy cardstock. He read the words out loud, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. He read about the corporate acquisition I had uncovered. He read about my legitimate claim to the foundational intellectual property of the company, and, most devastatingly, he read the exact balances of the secret accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. $20,400,000 in total, and the fact that they were now permanently frozen by federal mandate. Liam let out a guttural sound of pure panic. He dropped the divorce papers, frantically pulling his smartphone from his tailored suit pocket. His thumbs flew across the screen, desperately logging into the highly secure, encrypted banking applications he used to monitor his offshore wealth. He bypassed the security protocols, praying that my note was just a bluff. But the screen did not load his massive balances. Instead, a harsh, glaring red error message flashed across his display. It read that the account was suspended pending a federal investigation. He tried the second account. The exact same message appeared. The millions of dollars he had stolen, hidden, and worshipped were completely gone, locked behind an impenetrable wall of government intervention. The lead investor did not offer a shred of sympathy. He was a ruthless businessman who suddenly realized he had been dragged into the center of a massive, premeditated financial fraud. If the acquisition went through, his firm would be legally liable for the toxic debt Liam had created, and they would be purchasing a company whose core intellectual property was completely tied up in a vicious, high-stakes divorce litigation. The investor threw the handwritten note directly at Liam's chest. "This $40 million buyout is officially dead," he snarled, his face red with fury. "You lied to us about the ownership. You lied about your assets, and you are under federal investigation. My legal team will sue you into absolute oblivion for gross misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty." He stormed out of the office, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard the walls shook. Liam collapsed onto the damp floor. The same floor where I had spent 3 sleepless nights cracking his safe. He was surrounded by the scattered pages of the divorce petition that would strip him of his company, his properties, and his freedom. He had spent years meticulously digging a grave for me, only to fall headfirst into it himself. Within 48 hours, federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division arrived at our home with search warrants. The complex web of shell companies and phantom vendors he had used to funnel money overseas constituted severe tax evasion and wire fraud. His entire world imploded in a matter of days. He lost the startup company. He lost the luxury properties. He was forced to declare total bankruptcy to fight off the massive lawsuits from the venture capitalists. And ultimately, he lost his freedom, facing a minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. As for me, the woman who used to sew up the holes in her cheap winter coat, my reality changed completely. Because of my legally documented status as the original angel investor, the corporate court awarded me full control of the remaining company assets, along with the clear deeds to the penthouse in Florida and the mountain villa in Colorado. The federal government released the frozen offshore funds directly to my legal control as restitution for his extreme financial abuse. I am currently sitting on the balcony of my Miami penthouse, listening to the ocean waves and sipping a glass of truly expensive champagne. I no longer eat instant noodles, and I will never let anyone make me feel small again. I took back my life, my dignity, and every single cent he owed me. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.